In 1982, Kate Bush distanced herself from that squeaky, head-voiced whimsy that very much defined her early records. This, her fourth album, marked her transformation into a fearless, experimental artist. There is no doubt that Kate Bush is a refreshing and innovative artist, twirling her way through our front rooms with her wide-eyed appropriations of classic literature and Greek myth. And The Dreaming, considered a problematic album by many, contains an emotional wisdom and a maturity that shook the pop world of 1982. It sits comfortably up there with the dark miasma that was Susie's Kiss in the Dream House, The Cure's Pornography, or the Associates' album Sulk, maybe even Peter Gabriel's fourth album. Much of her work referenced history and heritage, and narratives road mapping her own quest for spiritual enlightenment. The Dreaming is a dazzling brocade of sound. I'd have to argue her earlier albums serve as a testimony to the fact that the pre-Smiths landscape wasn't as bleak as we thought. But nevertheless, she certainly was a breath of fresh air against punk's foul blast, wrote one of her biographers. Her otherworldly theatrics and general kookiness, contrasting interestingly with the nihilism, spit and rage of those phlegmy upstarts. This is an experimental work, if not a particularly accessible one, and was ahead of its time in some respects with its employment of world music, shifting time signatures, unusual percussions, vocal loops and samples. This is an album that's been created not by full band performance, but by adding layers of light and shade within the studio. Young Kate Bush, of course, which was under the guiding wing of David Gilmour of Pink Floyd, who funded her early demos, secured a record deal with EMI in July 1976. And studying movement with Bowie's mime instructor Lindsay Kemp, she honed her songwriting skills, combining them with dance and theatrical homages to British cinema and literature. She'd come a long way since her father showed her that middle C on the home piano. These songs are full of world textures and otherworldly atmosphere with layered vocals, and she dispensed with a lot of the melodic hooks that we found on her previous records. There was a casting off of that traditional instrumentation, the guitars, the drums, cymbals, in favour of sampling and a new synth technology. Also absent are the strings that sweetened her prior work and at times lent it a kind of a baroque feel. The piano is still the instrument on which she built her rather crooked house. In fact, this instrument was described by one critic as the plodding Victorian ringmaster of Bush's weird carnival. And Sat in Your Lap, which is one of my favourites on this album, features rainbow bassist Jimmy Bain, but also with synth contributions from Jeff Downes. I had the pleasure of asking Jeff Downes about his time working with Kate Bush and what that was like.
It was great. I only really did one track, but I spent a bit of time with her and showed her I had this newfangled sampler at the time called a Fairlight, which was a revolutionary keyboard, and she was very interested because I was one of the few. There were only about a handful of people who actually had one. I think she bought one shortly after it. She asked me to put some of these horn parts, stabby horns, on the song "Sat in Your Lap," which of course was a top 10 single, I think.
There was a distinct departure from the almost mystical and magical quality of her previous work. Instead, we get these mini narratives that explore heists gone wrong in the doff of the cap to the Ealing comedies, that is, There Goes a Tenor, New Age gurus dismantled in the wonderful Sat in Your Lap, and a culture on the brink of erosion is critiqued in The Dreaming, and there is a questioning of herself and desire to find God, perhaps, in Suspended in Gaffer. One critic has pointed out there are similarities between this album and T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, with its montage of disenchantment and despair, but this time it's in a pop format. I mean, certainly if you scratch the surface of many of these narratives, they reveal themselves to be quite bleak. Perhaps it was John Lennon's murder in 1980, the rise of neoliberalism with Thatcherism, Reaganomics, mass unemployment, the sinking of the Belgrano. Maybe this is the context that casts a long shadow over the proceedings and gave this music a darker shade. One of the cornerstones on this record is Houdini, with its chamber pop atmospheres and Eleanor Rigby-like strings, not to mention her aching voice and positively pearlescent piano. It is a vivid number which is depicted in the sepia on the cover of the record. The Dreaming has been described, and I'm quoting, as a collection of disparate narratives that appear to suggest a personal quest for artistic autonomy and the anxieties that accompany it. This album could be seen as very postmodern. It's very hacked up homage to different genres in a very modern context. As I've said, the Mockney accent employed in a Cockney crime caper, that is, there goes a tenor. The glimpse of God in a Gilbert and Sullivan-esque pirouetting suspended in gaff, and of course the narrative from the Vietnamese soldier pursuing his American enemy and pull out the pin. Suspended in gaffer gives voice to her insecurities and her crippling self-doubt when she sings, "Sometimes it's hard to know if I'm doing it right." And then the Sat in Your Lap. I mean, Sat in Your Lap was dismissed by melody makers as an arthritic, artistically constipated, out-of-touch travesty that should never have seen the light of day. Nevertheless, this song chimes with the Burundi beat of the times. We had Bow Wow Wow and Adam and the Ants. And there's some interesting choreography employed here. Inspired by hearing Stevie Wonder live, it serves as a meta-commentary on her step back from the banality of pop ascendancy that mocks shortcuts to knowledge. And its B-side was her rendition of Donovan's Lord of the Reedy River, which itself is a significant number. One critic has written of this: "It takes the minstrelsy of the original and filters it through the disquieting modern psychedelia, recorded in townhouse studios, disused swimming pool, in order to evoke the sensation of floating down a river. The song's grainy, low-resolution, fair-light motifs root it in its time, but the aqueous phantasmagoria points the way forward to Hounds of Love, the ninth wave." The Dreaming as a single did not do particularly well in the charts, but the semi-instrumental version of the B-side certainly demonstrates what a wonderful producer Kate Bush was becoming. Rolf Harris's didgeridoo provides a hypnotic drone that runs through this song. It's interesting at this time that Rolf Harris was involved in a bit of a tussle, which ended with an out-of-court settlement with Adam and the Ants, who appropriated his song War Canoe in their Prince Charming record. But this record, with its rumbling ethno-textures, which are beautifully juxtaposed with the Fairlight synthesizers, something she certainly explored on her previous album, it seems to embody sonically that kind of culture clash. You get white man invading the Aborigines' sacred turf, digging for plutonium and ore, which is ironically accompanied by the ancient tones of that civilization. And Bush narrates it in a grotesquely exaggerated Australian accent, which some have suggested is actually harkening back to the music hall and vaudeville's racist ethnic humour tradition. Uncomfortably, it has to be noted that this song's working title was the Abo song. But this song is fascinating with its animalistic chants and the idea of dream time, which is a belief system where ancestors leave their marks on the land, or as other forms through reincarnation. This demonstrates Bush's fascination with the transformations, and transformations in art, sound and subject matter. This album certainly showcases Bush's talent for writing about historical and imagined characters placed in unbearable moral predicaments. This is often referred to as a literary or cinematic side. But there is also, as I've said before, there is this connection with the almost British music hall tradition which she often mines. Leave It Open and Get Out of My House feels like a bad acid trip. We get this gorgeously controlled cacophony, a slice of avant-garde amid the post-punk landscape. A generation just prior to this had pogoed and gobbed their way into the public consciousness from those inner-city tenement blocks, decrying no future, had now all somehow transmogrified into this heroin chic of the new romantics. And certainly these two aforementioned numbers explore the soundscapes and spectral atmospheres that are quite disturbing. Leave It Open, with its thunderous gated drum sound, firmly rooted in the 1980s of course, and the subject matter is beautifully toyed with. I mean, Kate Bush has always enjoyed surrendering to the subject of the song, from Catherine Earnshaw's Ghost to the Bride in Black. There's always a palpable transformation going on here. Peter Swales wrote that her music is like a virtual compendium of psychopathology, at turns melancholic, obsessional, hysterical, but as a sign of strength in service to the song rather than weakness. All the Love features, interestingly, the sound of almost the sound of the closing of Venetian blinds, and climaxes with a message from Bush's actual malfunctioning answer phone, significant emblems of alienation associated with modernity. On this, her self-proclaimed Mad album, her cacophony of vocal sounds pushed boundaries of how white pop women should and could sing. There is braying and guttural exclamations which are juxtaposed with these hushed utterances. You get these strange inflections that move her away from that unthreatening, girlish head voice to this unruly pitch shifting. On Houdini, Kate Bush plays the part of his wife and consumed 2 bars of chocolate and a pint of milk to give enough spit and gravel to her voice, enough phlegm to give her voice has a transformative feel to it. Bess was said to pass a key that unlocked his bonds through a kiss. The inspiration, not just for the cover art, but also serves as a larger metaphor for the depth of trust we demand in love. And the same could be said of Night of the Swallow and Pull Out the Pin, where she employs strange vocal sounds to get into character. Certainly Houdini has a gothic quality to it, as she produces this meditation on the eternity of love's flame and its ability to traverse time. And she employs numerous gadgetry to enable these vocal pyrotechnics. Compression, flange, heavy-duty processing all give this album its visceral wallop. And her voice beautifully conjures up the panic, grief and hope of Harry Houdini's wife as she runs the gauntlet of several suspect mediums. Pull Out the Pin is an interesting one. She saw a documentary where the Viet Cong would often put a little golden Buddha in their mouth before they detonated a grenade. She saw in this act a kind of dark mirror to the key of the album. Both objects placed in the mouth in a way represent devotion and life, and the thin, arpeggiated synth textures and outro cricket sounds all speak to a kind of oral orientalism that places the narrative in its context. The closer, Get Out of My House, was actually inspired by 2 different narratives, The Shining and I believe Alien, the Ridley Scott film. All 3 spirits are eventually about a malevolent spirit trying to gain control over a vessel. Bush does not let the spirit in, but shouts "Get out" when it violates her demand. She becomes an animal. Such shape-shifting, of course, is a master trope in Kate Bush's work. In fact, one critic has written that it is indeed an enduring way for her music and performance to blend elements of non-Western spirituality and European myth. I think this is her best album. It's an adventurous tour de force. Really takes the listener on through these little mini narratives. This album enlarges a studio construct. I see nothing wrong in that. But what she does do, she achieves a hybrid of sound and cinematic visuals which add to the conceptual sweep of the record. Anyway, that's my critique of this album. If you've enjoyed it, please do share it. Do click like, subscribe, and check that notification bell. It makes all the difference to the YouTube algorithm. I'll leave you with my closing salvo, which is hope you're well, staying safe, and of course that you keep listening.